Cranave presents The Man in the Iron Mask, France's Greatest Royal Secret. Chapter 1. The Man with No Name. In the summer of 1669, in a France ruled by the grandeur and paranoia of King Louis XIV, a letter arrived at the gates of the Bastille, the fortress prison that loomed over the city of Paris like a silent warning. It came not from a court or a nobleman, but from the Minister of State himself, the powerful and feared Marquis de Louvois. The letter ordered the warden to prepare a secure cell for a new prisoner. This man, Louvois instructed, must be held in strict isolation. He was to speak to no one. His face was never to be seen. He would be given a servant, but the servant must not speak to him or learn his name. And above all, he must wear a mask. Not just any mask, an iron one. Heavy, locked, and unremovable. The prisoner arrived under heavy guard. No records list his name. No trial was held. His crime was never disclosed. For over 3 decades, he was transferred between France's most notorious prisons, Pignerol, Sainte Marguerite, the Bastille. Always under surveillance. Always silent. Always masked. When he died in 1703, his grave was marked only with a false name, Marchioli. The mask was removed. His face was buried. And the truth, it seemed, was buried with him. But whispers had already begun to spread. A man, hidden away from the world. Guarded like a secret more dangerous than any document. Treated not like a criminal, but like a ghost. Over time, one question began to echo through Europe. Who was the man in the Iron Mask? Chapter 2. The Iron Mask appears. There is no official record that tells us when the man first wore the Iron Mask. But the first whispers emerged in the early 1670s, during the reign of Louis XIV, the Sun King, a monarch known as much for his pageantry as for his obsession with control. The earliest concrete reference comes from a letter written by Marquis de Louvois, the king's war minister. In the letter, he instructed that a particular prisoner be kept in complete isolation, forbidden to speak, forbidden to show his face, and forbidden to share his name. The letter is real. It still exists. The mask, however, is not mentioned explicitly. But something strange happens in the phrasing. Louvois writes of a need to secure the prisoner's identity permanently. Other letters from guards describe how the man's face was always covered, even when he was alone in his cell. Then, in the prison at Pignerol, a remote fortress on the Italian border, witnesses reported seeing a masked man escorted by guards, eating separately, speaking to no one, and wearing a dark cloth mask with metal bindings. Later accounts would call it a full iron mask, heavy and bolted. Even stranger, his jailer was Benign d'Auvergne de Saint-Mars, a man fiercely loyal to the king. Saint-Mars was not just any warden. He was the kind of man you sent when you needed absolute silence. He guarded political prisoners, fallen nobles, and disgraced courtiers. But this man, the masked one, was never named in any of Saint-Mars's reports. Only called, "My special prisoner. The one you spoke of. He." Some claimed the mask was made of black velvet. Others insisted it was solid iron. One account even describes hinges at the jaw, allowing him to eat but not speak clearly. Another describes padding inside, to protect his skin from long-term wear. Was it truly iron? Or simply a symbol of shame and erasure? Whatever the case, it worked. Even in court documents, his identity disappears. We know the names of his guards. We know the name of the man who brought him food. We even know the name of the man who cleaned his cell. But not his. Never his. He was transferred again, this time to the island prison of Sainte Marguerite, off the southern coast of France. There, legend says that Saint-Mars built a special cell for him, with double doors and a narrow slit through which food could be passed, without the prisoner being seen. Visitors to the island spoke of hearing a metallic echo behind the prison walls. Servants claimed they were forbidden from even looking into his cell. One man, it said, was executed for trying to peek inside. And then, in 1698, he was moved again, this time to the Bastille itself. Now an old man, the prisoner arrived at night under heavy guard. He wore his mask. He did not speak. The governor of the Bastille recorded his arrival simply as a prisoner from Saint-Mars. High importance. Strict silence. He remained there until his death in 1703. After he died, his personal belongings were burned, his bedding destroyed, his cell scrubbed, the mask taken, his face never shown to the public, and his grave unmarked, except for a single, false name. Marchioli. A name that appears nowhere else in French royal history. And yet, the mystery did not die with him. Because by now, the rumors had grown too loud, too persistent. Who was so dangerous that he could not be named? What crime could justify a lifetime of silence and iron? And most haunting of all, what was he hiding? Or what secret was the crown hiding from him? Chapter 3. Royal Secrets and Silent Prisons. The reign of Louis XIV, the Sun King, was a theatre of absolute power. He ruled France not as a king among nobles, but as a god among men. He once said, "Elitat, c'est moi, I am the state." And he meant it. No dissent was tolerated. No gossip left unpunished. Control was everything, of language, of image, and most of all, of memory. In such a system, secrecy was not just policy, it was protection. From the Palace of Versailles to the cold stones of the Bastille, silence was the king's strongest weapon. And the prisons were his vaults. Unlike modern systems of justice, France's royal prisons could hold men without trial, without charge, and without record, through a mechanism known as a lettre de cachet. These royal warrants allowed the king or his ministers to disappear anyone, for any reason, at any time. A letter, a signature, a vanishing. Most prisoners of this kind were political nuisances, libel writers, or disgraced nobles. But the man in the iron mask was different. His custody was exceptional. He wasn't just hidden, he was erased. Even among secret prisoners, he stood apart. He was always escorted by Saint-Mars, a trusted agent of the king. He was never allowed contact with other inmates. Guards were changed constantly to prevent relationships. Servants were forbidden from speaking to him, or even looking at him. In a system built for secrecy, he required even more. Why? Some historians suggest that it wasn't what he did that mattered, but who he was. This theory gained traction after a closer look at the records from Pignerol prison, where the masked man was first held. There, at the same time, were several other high-profile prisoners. Nicolas Fouquet, former superintendent of finances, once the most powerful man in France before being arrested by Louis XIV. Eustache Dorga, a valet imprisoned for reasons unknown. Some say a spy, others say a scapegoat. The names matter less than what they represent. Men who knew something. Men who had seen too much. And the masked man was always kept nearby, but always separated. He was close enough to observe, but far enough to silence. Almost as if he wasn't meant to be punished, but to be quarantined. Theorists believe that his very identity posed a danger. If he spoke, he might have revealed embarrassing truths. If he was seen, his face might have meant something. That's why even his grave was falsified. That's why his belongings were burned. That's why Saint-Mars, in letter after letter, avoided giving him a name. There is even a cryptic phrase in one of Saint-Mars's reports. He is a man whose face must not be remembered. Not seen. Remembered. In Louis XIV's France, memory was treason. A face could start rumors. A rumor could start revolution. And so the mask, whether of iron or velvet, became the perfect prison. Not just of the body, but of the past. The man in the iron mask became a silence too dangerous to break. Chapter 4. Theories, Doubles, and the King's Shadow. For centuries, people have asked one question more than any other. Who was the man in the iron mask? And over the years, that single question has grown into dozens of answers, each more dramatic, more controversial, and more speculative than the last. Some theories are grounded in historical documents. Others are born of legend, imagination, and desperation to fill the silence. But among them all, a few stand out. Theory 1. The king's twin brother. Perhaps the most enduring, and most theatrical, theory is that the man in the iron mask was none other than Louis XIV's identical twin. The idea goes like this. The Queen gave birth to 2 sons. But to prevent a future war of succession, the second child was hidden, raised in secret. And when he grew older and began to question who he was, or worse, when others began to notice the resemblance, he was arrested and masked. A twin would have posed a mortal threat to the king. Not just politically, but symbolically. In a regime built on divine right and absolute power, 2 kings could not exist. This theory gained widespread popularity thanks to Alexandre Dumas, who wrote The Vicomte of Bragelonne, a romanticized novel in which the masked man is named Philippe, the hidden twin of Louis. It makes for a powerful story. But there is no direct historical evidence for a royal twin. No record of a second birth. No whispers in court at the time. Still, the theory refuses to die. Because it explains the mask. It explains the silence. And it explains why the prisoner had to vanish. Not because of what he did, but because of who he looked like. Theory 2. Eustache Dorga, the valet. A more documented theory names the prisoner as Eustache Dorga, a man of unclear origin, arrested in 1669 under unusual circumstances. Some say Dorga was a valet who overheard dangerous state secrets. Others suggest he was involved in a scandal involving royal corruption, blackmail, or treason. Records from Pignerol prison show that a man named Eustache Dorga was held under St. Mars's watch, at the same time and under conditions matching the masked prisoner. However, nowhere do the records explicitly say he wore a mask. Skeptics argue that Dorga may have been an alias, or even a deliberate misdirection. If he truly was the masked man, it still doesn't explain why his identity was so tightly controlled, or why he was treated with such extreme precautions compared to other prisoners. Theory 3. The disgraced noble or royal scandal. Another theory suggests that the prisoner was a nobleman who had become entangled in a scandal, possibly involving the Queen, the king's mistress, or even foreign royalty. Some accounts link him to Count Ercole Antonio Martioli, an Italian diplomat who was imprisoned after betraying secret negotiations between France and the Duke of Mantua. Marchioli, the false name on the grave, may be a distortion of Martioli. But again, the timeline is messy. Martioli was indeed imprisoned, but some sources suggest he died years earlier, elsewhere. There are similar claims about other high-ranking prisoners, even a disgraced cardinal, a cousin of the king, or a general suspected of espionage. Each theory fits a piece of the puzzle, but none fit them all. Theory 4. He never existed. The most skeptical theory of all is that the man in the iron mask was a myth, a fusion of separate prisoner accounts, embellished over time. Historians who support this theory point to the inconsistencies in records, the lack of direct eyewitnesses, and the long gap between the events and the legends. They argue that the story was shaped by writers like Voltaire and Dumas, who turned historical silence into poetic mystery. But even Voltaire, the Enlightenment philosopher who spent time in the Bastille himself, wrote confidently, "The man in the iron mask was someone of the highest birth." Voltaire claimed he heard this from guards and officials, but he never named a source. The truth is likely buried between the lines. Between what was recorded and what was intentionally left blank. Between a crown that feared rebellion and a system built to erase threats silently. Whoever the man was, twin, traitor, or tool, his existence mattered. Not because of what he did, but because of what he represented. A threat so dangerous, so symbolically powerful, that his face alone could not be allowed to exist. Chapter 5. What history could never confirm. In the end, The archives do not speak. They whisper, in footnotes, in redacted lines, in unsigned letters tucked between volumes. And that's all we have. For all the speculation, for all the books written and hours spent, no official document has ever revealed the true identity of the man in the iron mask. Not his name, not his crime, not even his face. He is one of the very few figures in European history to be so carefully, so thoroughly erased, not only in life, but in memory. And perhaps that tells us more than a name ever could. Because in the absolute monarchy of Louis XIV, identity was power. A name could spark loyalty. A face could inspire revolt. A rumor, even a false one, could shake the foundations of the crown. It didn't matter if the man in the mask was a valet, a twin, or an unlucky noble. What mattered was that someone believed he might be. So they silenced him, buried him in stone, and steel, and time. Not because he was guilty, but because someone feared what his existence might mean. There are clues, yes. Letters, timelines, inconsistencies. But the core of the story remains locked, not in a cell, but in a royal decision never written down. We'll never know what the king saw when he looked into that man's eyes. We'll never know if he regretted what he did, or if he even thought about it at all. The man died alone, unnamed, forgotten, and yet, he is remembered more than most kings. In that way, perhaps the greatest irony of all is this. They tried to erase him from history, but in doing so, they made him immortal. He became a question too loud to silence, a face too hidden to forget, a prisoner whose chains were made not of iron, but of fear. And though centuries have passed, and kings have come and gone, the man in the iron mask still stares back from the shadows of history, asking us to look and wonder.